Today we're going to be speaking to a colleague, friend, campaigner called Beth Morrison, whose single-mindedness and campaigning style is trying to change Scottish legislation. Beth, great to have you here.
Hi everybody, thanks for having me on. As Andy just said, I am Beth Morrison. I'm the founder of PABS. If you don't know what PABS is, it's Positive and Active Behaviour Support Scotland. It's a registered charity. A lot of people know me as Callum's mummy though, and the mother behind the campaign against the use of restraint and seclusion in schools. Yeah.
Yes, you're well known for that, no doubt. What we'd like to start with is just, can you tell our listeners, how did Beth Morrison be the Beth Morrison in front of the screen, in front of us? A bit about your story, your history, before the Callum's Law thing and afterwards. Just give us a little body guide.
So what brought me here? How did I get here? You know, for nearly 30 years, I was a travel agent. I had a lovely life, you know, I travelled all over the world. I had lovely clients, I had a fabulous career. But what brought me here was probably the most profound experience of my life. And that experience changed everything and sent me on a journey that I don't think any mother should have to take. And that was what happened to my son, Callum. Callum's got epilepsy, cerebral palsy, he's autistic. He's profound communication and sensory differences, but he's also one of the gentlest souls and the most loving souls that I know. But when Callum was very young, he was subjected to restraint and seclusion at his special school. We had no idea that they could do this to a child. I had no idea that this existed. I had heard terms like positive handling. I didn't really understand what that meant. But they can do it, and they did do it. And one day Callum was riding a specially adapted disabled bike around an empty gym hall. He had low muscle tone. He'd never ridden a bike before, and he was having such fun. But he was pulled off the bike by 4 members of staff because we were told Callum hadn't followed instructions. He had not complied. So they forced my small disabled child face down on the floor, and they held him there until he couldn't breathe. He lost consciousness, he urinated, and then, still in his urine-soaked clothes, they picked him up and they strapped him down with straps into a wooden Heathfield chair. And then stood over him with an egg timer to show that he was being punished. And nobody told me what happened, nobody called me. They simply put Callum on the school bus and sent him home. And when he got home, he collapsed. His lips were blue. And all he could say was, "I dizzy, mummy, teacher hurt." His little body was covered in bruises. We took him to hospital. And the doctors said that the injuries that Callum had, and he had over 60 bruises on his little body, they said that the petechial hemorrhaging that he had to his chest were usually the kind of injuries that they saw in hanging, in strangulation, and in restraint death. We could have lost Callum that day. And, you know, the school were very surprised that I was upset, that I had dared to challenge them. And they said to me, "Don't worry, Mrs. Morrison, we can handle this. It'll be hard, but Callum must learn to do as he is told." So it was compliance, really. There were no written records. There was no real explanation. Just the claim that, well, because he hadn't complied and he hadn't done as he was told, even though Callum had very little understanding of the instructions that they'd given to him, there was no accountability, no protection, just silence. And honestly, I felt that they did everything they could to cover it up. And what we did know, what we could see, was that our joyful, trusting, loving boy became withdrawn. He was anxious and deeply distressed. He just could not go to school. And as a mum, I knew something was really wrong. And when I finally got to the truth, it broke my heart. But it also lit a fire in me. And that fire became the campaign for Callum's Law. Yeah.
It's really hard. Even though we've heard your truth before, it's always hard to hear it. And I guess, I know we've both spoken to you probably about this before, but I guess the anger you felt as well at that point, I think you conveyed to me before.
I mean, we were, my husband, Peter, and I were utterly devastated. My husband was an educator. He was an academic at university and a very confident man. He was surrounded by educators, and I think we just didn't understand why would they do that to Callum? The wee boy that just sat on her knee and wanted hugged and loved, and he was so gentle. And how could it happen to Callum? Nobody could tell us the reason why except this non-compliance. And I can remember the very first meeting that we had after the incident. There was 14 members of staff and people from the council that came to the meeting, and Pete and I, people that know me now, I was a different person back then. I just sat with my head bowed the whole 2 hours of the meeting, and I just cried. I didn't say a word. Peter did all the talking. And it was devastating, frightening.
It's horrendous.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, I've heard you talk about it before, but it is that revisiting of how can people do this and go on about this word non-compliance. I can't stand this languaging we do. This it's like a whole other language used for children like ours. It's just so divisive and cruel and utterly inhumane, clinical, and it's horrible.
They sanitise it almost, Ellie. I mean, I'm saying quite a lot about this, the use of language. And, we have heard of the use of sanctuary, calm rooms, quiet rooms, blue rooms, rainbow rooms. And, I've visited a lot of these rooms, and I'm afraid they're cupboards. They're normally the smallest rooms in the school. They don't have windows. Most of them aren't heated, and they're bare, and they're austere, and they're clinical, and there's nothing in those places that would offer any kind of comfort. But the sanitised language that's used hides the reality of what goes on behind that door, behind that. It's solitary confinement.
It is.
Yeah. Without getting into trouble and his thinking, quite recently I had to write a report, not a Scottish or English case, of someone who had 2-to-1 staffing in a school, special needs, challenges, where they used a contemplation room. It's very easy to write this hypothetical report, and some of these things with it. So if you have 2 members of staff, go for a walk. Use the outside space you already have if things are really bad. But it was very clear, something you've said that just really hits a nerve. It was being used as a form of punishment. And there was no doubt it was being used. This idea that we're going to straighten a child out and fix them like Super Nanny coming in, or other TV programmes before we get into trouble, fixing a problem and going. Why do you think people are so unaware? Because I think quite a lot of people are unaware. That's how I think some people are transparent. Most people are unaware that that's the message behind what they're doing. Behave I will control you. What do you think that's about? Your years of campaigning.
I do think it's about control. I think that very recently, I was at a conference and a lady came up to me and she said, I don't like this word restraint, Beth. It doesn't, it's not right. It's not a term that we use in our school. Instead, we much prefer the phrase warmly protect. And, you know, that's the first time I'd heard warmly protect.
Just no.
That's a new one. God help us.
Then I was just scrolling through social media the other day when I came back and somebody else used the same phrase, warmly protect. And I thought, oh, okay. So again, we're hiding behind this fluffy language. And, you know, if we use warmly protect, then, you know, we're warmingly protecting little Jimmy as we drag them by their arms and legs in a caring sea vice grip where they hold on to their little arms and legs and it'll cause bruises, but we're warmly protecting them along the corridor and putting them into reflection room or sanctuary. And because they're using that language, they see that it's okay. It's not okay.
No. It's not. The other thing about
that's
words,
horrific.
That's a new one. Warmly protect. Thank you. I won't be able to unthink that now. Beth, that's in there. In the lexicon. Escort methods is my other big hate. We escorted someone to an area, covers a multitude of sins. So, yeah.
Or physically support, I see a lot written in incident reports. You know, little Jimmy was physically supported into sanctuary. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Yes, we'll just physically support this child who's maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. Chronologically, they're that age, but cognitively, they're babies, they're infants. And we'll physically support them to sanctuary or the den or the rainbow room. And it all sounds very nice, but the reality is not. It's punishment. How else? Why else would you do that?
There are studies published on, the general term for the use of punishment, where you're more likely to use punishment and control the less you have an understanding of the person, the more they're an object. And I see this a lot with kids. They're very nice people, who I'm sure are very nice in their communities. They go home and they, they think they're really wonderful people, go into a school or an environment, and they turn into something else. We're doing this to teach. We're doing this for this person's good. And I think punishment is another word we should use more, not less, because it makes us think.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the word that schools best use is consequence. Yeah. I mean, yes, well, as a result of little Jimmy's behaviour, there is a consequence to that. And yeah, so consequence is another one.
I'm looking at Ellie, we were supposed to do these later on, but to this area, if you want to add natural consequences, then I'll probably be admitted somewhere with a mental health breakdown because it's used too much. The natural consequence of somebody running out in the road is to be hit by a car. Is that how we teach people? No. We teach people by nurturing and learning. Sorry, I'll shut up there now, Ellie. She's triggered me already. Beth Morrison, you've triggered me already.
Sorry, darling. Sorry, okay. Andy.
Okay.
I know. It's such a horrible...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is horrible.
So, but just for our listeners, because I'd love you to explain, you've been fighting for a decade. This is not just a year, is it, Beth? This has gone on for a decade now. You've been pushing and pushing. Yeah, 15. Decade and a half. And you are seeing, am I right in saying you're seeing an increase? We're not seeing less of this, are we? However we soften our language or make it fluffy in some way or other, it's not going down, is it? It's going up from your research.
Yeah. I mean, because of the work that Kate Sanger and I have been doing with the Scottish Government, we started to collect data, because families find me. I'm very easily found on, social media. I've been out there in the media, so I'm very easily found. So they come to me and they tell me, Beth, this happened to my child. So I started to collect the stories, because these families come to me, they come to Kate because we listen to them, and we let them know that actually they're not alone, because that feeling of isolation, it's only your child. There's thousands of us. And over the last decade and a half, we started, talking to families. And 10 years ago, I decided, well, there's no recording or reporting of this. So if nobody else is going to do it, I will. And, remember, I'm just a mum. At the end of the day, I'm a mother. And yes, I'm a campaigner, but I started to collect data. And if you look at the data for last year, the last school year, we had 269 cases. 141 of those filled in my family questionnaire. And in the last school year, 38% of the children involved were 5 years old. Now, previously to that, around 33% were 6. So until last year, it was 6 years old, and it had been that age for a long time. Now it's getting worse. And most recently, the data that I've collected for the current school year, so just August, we're only in November now, so August, September, October, November, 4 months. Kate and I have had 152 cases.
Can I just ask, is this just Scotland?
Just Scotland. That's just Scotland. England's a whole different ballgame. We've done the data for England as well, but Scotland, and something like 75 of those 152 children are 5. We've got 2-year-olds. We've got something like, I think, 6 2-year-olds. We've got, in double figures, 3-year-olds, and then 4 and 5. It's little children who had been physically and emotionally traumatised. And they do it, schools do it because they can. They can. And, I've got a 3-year-old granddaughter who's neurotypical. She's very bright. Her tantrums are legendary. She's at that toddler stage. Would I want 2, 3, 4 people holding her down with force? Absolutely not. Would it be necessary? No. Why are we doing it? Why are we doing that? Because the other thing that I'm going to tell you, in the last decade, since Kate and I started to collect our data, do you know we've only had one case out of around 6,000 UK-wide, one case that involved a child that was considered neurotypical. The rest are all children with disabilities, autism. I think 89% are autistic. But the vast majority, well over 90% of the children that we support and the families that we support, well over 90% of these children have either no language at all or very little verbal language, very, severely compromised in the way that they can communicate. So how do they say, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, the lights in here are too bright for me, it's too noisy, I'm not coping with the environment, this activity is too difficult, it's too easy, I'm bored, or I'm in pain? How do they communicate that? They communicate with their behaviour, because it's all they have. And by holding them down with such force that their little bodies are bruised, that emotionally they're traumatised because they're left alone in these cupboards. And I'm sorry, I call them cupboards. I don't care what they're called. I don't care what the label says on the door. It's a cupboard. They're cupboards. What are we doing to those kiddies? That's punishment. And you know what? I'm just going to say, I think it's abuse.
I want
It
to
is,
take a
Beth.
risk here. I'm going to say this again. Devil's advocate, and you know this is not me talking. Kids have got to learn. Yeah? You get them when they're young, you straighten them out, the younger the better, and we have these well-adjusted citizens. I know how I would argue against that. How do you argue against that cultural message that's still quite powerful?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that... I don't know if you're aware of the narrative at the minute, especially in Scotland, and I think the reason why we're having it in Scotland is because of the bill. But just to say that there's a massive amount of media coverage at the minute about violence in schools.
Yes.
Violence in schools. Schools are violent, terrible places where children are aggressive, and you know, it's an awful place to be in. The poor staff that have to deal with this. You know, they shouldn't be dealing with this. I've heard teachers saying, I didn't go into teaching to teach these children.
Yeah.
And, you know, I look at that and I see members of the public, not just teachers and educators, calling for harsher punishment. And, you know, let's sort these kids out, and they can't get away with this. And because there's no punishment anymore and there's no consequences for these kids, they get away with murder, and schools don't have the power, that word power, to do anything about it. And, you know, I just say, well, what kind of human beings have we turned into that we think that punishing a child and harsher treatment for a child is the way forward? And it's frightening me the extent that this is happening. And I just think that when a child is communicating, I can't cope, through their behaviour, and the human adult response to that is to hold them down, to drag them along the corridor and shove them in the cupboard. That's inhumane. And it's why have we become a nation that seems to think or seems to believe that control is the way forward, punishment, shaming children into behaving? Oh, that's wrong. All we're doing is creating a nation of traumatised children who can't go to school anymore, who, you know, I've seen children being dragged, prized from their mother's arms in the morning to go into school. They're restraining these children to get them in. God knows what's happening to them once they are in there. They're spending hours and hours and hours in isolation because they've not complied. They've not sat there like nice, good little children and did everything that the teacher says, and, you know, follow the teacher around the room and do all that. And, you know, the children that I represent are the most vulnerable children. And these are children like Callum, like Ella, like Kate's daughter Laura, who need extra care, extra love, extra nurturing, and they're not getting that. And we should be hanging our heads in shame as a country, because we will be judged on how we treat our most vulnerable. And from where I'm sitting right now, we're not doing well. We're not.
No. Absolutely, Beth. I think it's interesting that you said that, because of the, excuse me, the pressure of the bill, that this, I mean, we all know it's how it plays.
It's a backlash.
If we want to stop something, we create a new monster, don't we? Look over here. This is your enemy now. And then, yeah, it's just the playbook stuff, isn't it? The most powerful thing we can do, I imagine you're doing, is just ignore it, because actually the less wind we give it, the less it can burn away into. But just for those who are listening, who probably wondering, when you said it's because of the bill, so you've been fighting this for like a decade and a half already. Can you share with everybody just a bit more about what Callum's Law is, what the bill is, where you're at, what it's going to mean?
So Callum's Law came about because I realised that no matter what guidance was out there, no matter what the government put out, no matter what they said should be happening, it wasn't happening. So I approached a gentleman called Daniel Johnson. Now, Daniel is a Labour MSP in the Scottish Government. He won't mind me telling you, he has ADHD himself. And he really understood, about Callum's case, about what we'd been doing. So I approached him 2.5 years ago now and said, will you help me with a members' bill? And thank God he said, yes, I'll help. So Daniel brought a private members' bill to the Scottish Parliament. And what we're asking for was mandated recording and reporting of all incidents of restraint and seclusion. And Daniel talks about, as a parent, we're all very familiar about the little slips of paper that we get home from school to say, your child fell on the playground today and skinned their knee. That's recorded, it's written in an accident book, and parents are told. But what I found, both with my own experience and speaking to thousands of other families, that they weren't being given that same information because they don't have to do it. Yeah. So if a child is accidentally harmed, the parents get to know it's recorded. But when there's a deliberate act of force used, no, you're not told. So we're asking for mandatory recording and reporting. And that will hopefully give us some kind of oversight into what's happening in schools, and will hopefully give real protection for children who can't speak for themselves. We're also calling for mandatory training and resources for staff. And when I say training, I don't mean the training of every staff member in restraint. And actually, some of the Scottish teaching unions have got a very firm grasp of the wrong end of the stick because they think that we're talking about restraint training for staff. Absolutely not. It's the complete opposite. So what I want is training for staff in understanding behaviour as a means of communication, meeting the physical, emotional, and most importantly for me is the sensory needs of children, because I do think that a lot of the behaviour that we see is sensory related. And, when you've got to sit in a classroom and listen to all that noise and you're overwhelmed and so you're communicating through your behaviour, and as a punishment, your playtime is taken away from you and you have to stay in at playtime. You're not allowed to go out and run and jump and do all the things that might regulate your little body. That's a problem. So we need to make sure that staff understand about things like interoception, proprioception, vestibular, and all of these things. It's really important. And so if we can do that, then hopefully we'll not get to such a point in a child's day where they'll become very distressed and that they would ever need to use it. So essentially, I want training in how not to have a situation where you're going to intervene. And statutory guidance, because the guidance that we have at the moment in Scotland is lengthy. There are some good parts. I spent 5 years helping the government to write it, but it's not UNCRC compliant, and we did tell them about that. So it needs to be statutory, it needs to be UNCRC compliant.
I'll just stop you there for our audience. UN, what do you mean by those terms?
The United Nations Committee for the Rights of the Child.
Yeah.
I've said in both 2016 and 2023 to all UK assemblants, so that's Westminster, it's Stormont, it's the Scottish Parliament, it's the Welsh government as well, that restraint should be explicitly prohibited in education settings. It also said that we should abolish the use of isolation rooms. Yet we're still using them all over the UK. And that is, twice, 2016, 2023, that the UNCRC have said, no. We know that there's a problem in education. This has got to stop. Yet we're still doing it. So the bill is currently at stage 2. It has just been scrutinised by the Education Committee. So in Scotland, what they do is they have a committee responsible for scrutinising the bill. So we've had evidence sessions over the last few months with lots of different people. And now there will be a debate in the Parliament, and they'll have amendments, and then the MSPs will have a vote whether to pass or reject it. And right now we've got good cross-party support, including the Scottish Government, who've said that they back the general principles of the bill. And that's really positive. And I'm hopeful it'll pass. But I feel I've got to say this. I have never called for an outright ban on restraint. I do know that sometimes, in order to keep a child safe from significant harm, life-threatening harm, that sometimes you do have to hold a child. But as the years go on, you know what, I'm finding that I'm questioning that belief, and I'm wondering if I've got it wrong. Because the more families that come forward and the more stories that we hear, the evidence from the families is overwhelming. And it's the youngest ones, as I've said, that are affected. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'm questioning the use of restraint on young children. I think we've got to do better. What I do believe in 100% is that isolation rooms have to go. They've got to be banned. Don't think that any child should ever be locked away. They're not criminals. What are we doing punishing them for behaviour that they're only trying to communicate that they can't cope? And do you know what? It's been 15 years, and I'll be honest with you that I don't know what to do next if Callum's law doesn't pass. Because for the last 15 years, this campaign has been my life, my purpose, and my promise to Callum, because he said to me, "Mummy, we have to protect the children." And he actually said in Ellie that, you know, when we went to the House of Lords back in 2020, he said to the lady from the DFE, "Can you help me? Because the children aren't naughty, they're scared." And I thought that was really profound. And I don't know what will happen, but I do know that somehow I'm going to have to find the strength to carry on, because these kids still need us and I can't ever walk away.
Do you actually fear they won't vote in favour of the law? Is that a real fear?
I think that the political landscape and the culture of this country right now is something that doesn't support human rights. I'm feeling that there's a massive pushback on human rights right now, especially where children are concerned, especially where ethnic minorities are concerned. And this narrative of violence in schools and the power that the teaching unions have has really been, it's powerful. I've got everything crossed, fingers, toes, everything. My biggest concern maybe at the moment is that the timescale right now, the Scottish elections are in May. We really are going to have to work really hard to get this over the line. I think that our First Minister, Mr. Swinney, has been involved in this for a lot of years. The Cabinet Secretary for Education is behind us. So I'm hopeful, but I never like to run before I can walk. I just don't know. I would like to say yes. I mean, Daniel Johnson, MSP, he's hopeful. He thinks it'll pass. In my heart, yeah, I think the MSPs will do the right thing. But my head's still telling me, You know, there's all these things that we've still got to get through. We've got the debate, we've got the vote.
Yeah.
There's one comment I'd like to make on that, because you mentioned it before, which is you're seeing, a lot of non-inclusion, harsh language. We've all been exposed to it, particularly on social media. But one thing I keep saying to people is, it makes us, for some people, it doesn't make us give up. It makes us fight harder for what you think is right. And I would just say to you that I'm an optimist rather than a pessimist. I think there's enough good people out there to do the right thing. But we still have to call out why things are wrong. The question I said to you early on about, well, these kids are naughty, that's been around for this debate forever. And the other point I would like to make is, having been involved in undercover inquiries, a lot of horrible things in my career, one thing that's very constant is that narrative of staff are stressed, teachers are stressed, they're in a difficult situation. My answer is always simple. Most stressed people don't do abusive things. In fact, the vast majority. It's important that people are less stressed, but we mustn't use it as an excuse for justifying bad things and bad practice. I'm quite I'll be honest with you, I'm tired of hearing. I'm waiting for the next inquiry to come around. But it's people like you and others, I am more of an optimist. I don't think everyone in the world's changed. We've just allowed, by what's happened, anyone can say anything they like at the moment. No matter, I've got to be honest, no matter how offensive it is, it's almost like the world has lost its filter in the last 5 years. But not everyone's lost their filter. And I think what you're doing in Scotland, my frustration is that should be in England, the bigger country, just in size and numbers, wholeheartedly. And I think what you're doing in Scotland and what Deirdre's doing in Northern Ireland really could have an impact on 60 other million people. So I'm not just rooting you for Scotland, I'm rooting you for us in the UK as well.
I think, I mean, I've tried so hard all over the UK. I mean, Ellie knows the data that I've collected from English families as well. And I've decided for this year not to collect the data from England because I'm just one person. And everything I do is unpaid. But I feel that if we can get Scotland to change the law to protect our most vulnerable children in law, we can influence the other nations as well. And, you know, I've been to so many meetings with the DFE. I've got more coming up. I'm very worried about England and the culture that we have in England towards punishment and, you know, the prolific use of isolation rooms for not just neurodivergent children, but for neurotypical children as well. And this drive about children must be in school and it's the only place that they can learn. And almost, you know, this bill that they're trying to pass at the minute is having a massive impact on families that have chosen to home educate. Very worried about England. I'm very worried about the changes that they're about to announce with regard to recording the use of restraint. And I'm not sure if I'm 100% right on this because I'm going to question the Department of Education, but they seem to be saying that they will not record the use of seclusion if it's for punishment. That is really worrying. You know, I mean, the UNCRC have said that the use of restraint and seclusion must never be used as a form of punishment.
Isn't that slightly nudging up to Article 3 there, Beth?
Yes.
That's dangerous. And I also think, because we reviewed it in a recent meeting, didn't we, that there's non-clarity of the wording around significant events.
Yep.
And I was saying, well, what's significant to my child versus the experience of a teacher or a TA? We've got a gap there, haven't we? So what does that word mean? Yeah.
This is as old as time. It's not just a narrative. Certain states in America, I won't quote them for legal reasons, eradicated restraint by not recording it for years. This started in the 80s. There were 2 massive states in America. The restraint went to 0 until campaigners went, you're just saying there's got to be a threshold of a child being physically injured to make it notifiable, which meant 98% of their restraints, in terms of actual beyond bruising, they massively did it. I've had a problem with, I work in lots of different places, Beth, different countries. Republic of Ireland, there's a similar problem with their education department. Rates of seclusion by sides of the country, they actually call it seclusion. They don't even bother to fancy up with language. But education departments in general tend to be quite conservative, in my experience. The only ones I've seen that and buck the trend, in my professional experience, a couple of the Scandinavian ones. I won't say which 2, because the other 2 will get annoyed if they hear this, where there's that change in that shift. And I think you're right as an optimist. I think what happens in Scotland now, my worry about Northern Ireland is a lot of people in this country, where I'm sitting, see Northern Ireland as a different world. Scotland, the physical connectivity means I think you are making people uncomfortable, and they should be, because change doesn't occur with us sanitising everything. So, but I've been worried about the UK Department of Education since I qualified in 1988. It's not changed that much.
I mean, the EHRC did a formal investigation back in 2020-21. It was after the House of Lords thing that we went to Ellie. And
sorry, for our listeners, can I just say, I'm sitting here with people who've campaigned actively, been to the House of Lords. You put your feet and your faces right out there in the front line with this debate. Just want to say that for our listeners. Sorry,
I think one of the things that came out of that, Beth, for me, that was most impactful, do you remember how it brought all of the political parties together? So we had cross-party representation, didn't we? They actually put their swords down and all of them said, this is not right. Whether it was Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, we heard from each party, didn't we? They all came together and I remember that as being like, wow, look what happens when you take something that everybody can relate to or feels. All the other stuff they don't agree on just fell away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel that we've got that in Scotland at the minute. So when Daniel decided to take the members' bill forward, we weren't sure how the SNP were going to be. We knew that the Lib Dems were on board.
Sorry,
we knew that
for our listeners again, Scottish National Party. Not nationalist, national.
National Party. Mm-hmm. So the SNP, Scottish National Party, they are in government. And they have been, I believe it's about 16 years. And they have quite a big, at the moment, they have quite a big majority. But we weren't sure what was going to happen. And then as time went on, they listened to us. They heard about Callum. They heard about Laura. They heard about all these different cases. And Kate and I took the cases to them. We showed them the pictures. We gave them the stories, we gave them the stats, and they support it. So that feels good that we have that in Scotland. Of course, now we've moved on. In Westminster, we've got other people in power. We've got other MPs, and I think that there's a disconnection still down in Westminster where they're just not getting it. You've got some MPs like Chris Coughlin who are really speaking out.
Yeah.
But the people who are in power need to listen. They need to hear the stories. They need to hear that restraint is not therapeutic, it's not educational, it's traumatic, and it leaves lasting scars. I mean, what happened to Callum? It happened 15 years ago, but today he will talk about it as though it happened yesterday. He hasn't forgotten. And remember his words. The children aren't naughty, they're scared. And when I asked him, Callum, what do you mean they're scared? And he said, because school's a scary place, Mummy. Mm-hmm. And with his limited communication, for him to say that to me all these years later, I think, that is very powerful. We've got to listen to the children. They don't have words, so we can only listen through watching their behaviour and understanding what that behaviour means. And it's the same about this restraint reduction narrative. It's not just a policy goal. It should be a moral obligation.
Exactly, Beth.
Absolutely.
It starts with government. They've got to lead on this. And they're not.
And do you know what, Beth? Since we were there in 2019, I remember Norman Lamb was heading it up. And obviously we had Helen Hayes, Steve Reed, Anne-Marie Trevelyan stood. I mean, literally every party was in the room. And then when Norman retired, I remember there being a sadness around resonated through our entire community, didn't it? Because he was a man of such integrity, and it was never about him. He was totally humble, and he just said the stuff that everybody was thinking, but nobody would say. And he said it because of moral obligation and responsibility, like you said, rather than anything else. Like, this is not right, and I'm going to say it's not right. And I would love to see that kind of courage in our politicians today, to actually do the right thing, to say the right thing, for just the sake of it being the right thing, nothing to do with their careers or any party stuff, just because, these are our children, all of our children.
I think, we've got to get that message across. How do we do it? I mean, Ellie, we've sat in meetings with people who we think can influence. And one of the things that's worrying me at the minute is how that influence is done. Because my worry is that some organisations that are out there, they want to help. They want to be front and centre of the conversation. But when it comes to people with lived experience, when it comes to the families, when it comes to the children, I feel as though we're told what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what we can say, what we can't say.
Yeah.
I've always been very clear. Nobody can sack me. I will not be silent. I'll say these things. I'll say it right now. It's wrong. It's wrong. We need to be talking about the elimination of the misuse of restraint.
Absolutely. Elimination.
Elimination's the word, not reduction anymore.
Aim high. Aim high.
Aim higher. I hashtagged aim higher on Twitter a few years ago.
Aim high
yeah.
hashtag.
Hashtag aim higher, because we have to. I mean, I think now that we should be talking about the elimination of restraint and seclusion. Elimination, not reduction. How many years have we been talking about restraint reduction and it's not working? Because when you say reduce, it means, but it's okay, you can still do it.
Well,
it gives life to those words. What's significant, depending where you stand in the room, and we're breathing life into that elusive, uncertain language. We're covering, making nice words out of, you said, rainbow rooms, and
absolutely.
We just
you sanitize the language. You make it easier for people.
I think it's just easier if we just say it's not necessary, because actually when you take something away, what you do is you invite people to be creative in a different way. And if it's not available, you have to do something differently. And we know we can do things differently. And it might just force the system to actually do something quite different in terms of, well, we can't keep going in lines and troughs because we don't have these punitive measures available. So how do we do that? And I think at the heart of it, I mean, you said briefly that Callum still carries with him the imprint of that. Do you think the people who enact restraint or seclusion also carry the imprint?
Some do. Sorry.
They can't. I mean, they can't. I mean, they've got to go to work every day. I've heard people who I love and respect talk about that they used restraint. They've taken people to seclusion rooms. And, the 10, 15, 20 years have passed. And now they look back and say, what the hell was I thinking about? What was I doing? But the real trauma of restraint, seclusion, physical intervention, forced isolation, whatever you want to call it, the impact on our children is lifelong. Lifelong. I mean, Callum is an adult now. He's a young adult. He still doesn't have an awful lot of language, but he remembers what happened, and he still has nightmares. That's not right.
I want to be optimistic
right,
about
Beth.
something. I want to be optimistic about something. Anyone listening to this will see that you're fighting, you all are, we all are, a battle, feels like a war. But there's something else that the reason why we use this language is to sanitize it, because it makes it easier to go into work. It makes it easier to walk, as we said in the break, walk past someone who's suffering rather than saying, are they okay? What can I do? I think this whole area, and you're one of, I've got two people here at the moment, and others too, who psychologist called Howard Gardner said years ago, he analysed how people change their minds, or affirm what's right. And he put this very complicated cognitive model with highfalutin language, with lots of different variables. Tragedy, we learn from tragedy. We learn from other things. The one thing he couldn't actually not emphasise was resonance. We often change our minds because over time we don't feel right about it. What you're doing all the time, by being edgy, by giving people data, by telling them stories, they're more than that. It keeps it real for people. And I would say this is the time when we need more campaigning, not less. And there's one word I've heard in some of our talks over the last few days that's hit me really hard. We talk about low arousal approaches requiring courage to not intervene, to not lay hands on. I think to be systemically doing what we're all trying to do as well, mine in a small way, takes courage.
Yeah, it does.
You mustn't lose that. You're not going to lose that.
And I think, I think back to that day that I was telling you about after, I'm going to say it, my son nearly died. And 14 people were in that room against Peter and I. And I look at the person I was back then, and I see who I am now, and I will not go away. I will not be silenced. You can say whatever you want to me. You're not going to change my mind. You know, I want Callum's law to pass. And as I say, I don't know what I'll do if it doesn't. But somehow I'm going to have to keep going. But we can't just have something in one country in the United Kingdom. It's got to be across the UK for every child in every setting to be protected. And to do that, we need a cultural shift. The restraint and seclusion are no longer seen as acceptable. Not acceptable to put hands on a little child. It is not. Unless you are stopping them from running into the road in front of a car or jumping into deep water. No, you do not. In Scotland, we also have what's commonly referred to as the anti-smacking bill. You are not allowed to physically punish a child in Scotland. But do you know it only applies in the family home? It's only in the family home. It doesn't apply to schools or any kind of professional setting. It's not acceptable.
No. We're back to the language and the divisiveness of the discrimination and the obvious polarization. It's just, we're coming to a close. So I just want to ask you a couple more things, Beth, if that's okay. More positive, looking forwards. What would you like to achieve in the next 5 years? And if you had, or could be known for one thing, if you had an epitaph, what would it say? Not easy to answer, but...
No, I mean, obviously I want Callum's law to pass, not just in Scotland, but across the UK. And I know that's going to be hard. I want lived experience to be embedded into every policy conversation. I want families to feel heard, not just heard, but respected and supported, not dismissed and not blamed, because that's another big thing, parental blame. It's huge because, again, you know, it distracts away from the real problem. If we say the problem is the parents, then, you know, we're saying, no, it's not the environment, it's not our schools, it's nothing that they're doing. But unfortunately it is. The parents shouldn't be blamed. I want to see the end, END, of isolation rooms. I want to see the training, the support and the resources to be given to staff in every school. I want to see children treated with dignity, not disciplined for behaviour related to their neurological state. But you know what? I want Callum to know that his story, his experience changed the world. And if you want to know really what I would have an epitaph, and I thought about this.
Careful.
And I think
Be very careful.
I want to say she never stopped fighting for the children who couldn't speak.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And it's so true, because I know you will keep going. I know you said, what will I do? And I was like, I know what you'll do, Beth. You'll do what you always do, is you'll get straight back on that horse and you'll go at it.
Because you're going to pass the damn law. It's going to pass.
It's in your blood, this, and it's in your soul. And once your soul's marked with this experience, I think, you know, you have to just keep going, don't you? It gives you a purpose like you've never known.
Yeah. There's nothing else for it. You just have to do it.
One thing as well, and again, a positive postscript. One thing that we all do in different ways, and by doing this podcast and others, is we give ourselves extra energy. We were talking to colleague Deirdre Shakespeare this morning. This is actually more than just, let's throw something out there on the media. It energises us. You've charged my batteries up, but you know, as I'll call you Morrison, don't charge me up too much at the next conference, all right? Because you are not going to take no for an answer. And if we can help in any way, we'll make damn well sure that people listen. Sometimes you take a horse to water, and where a politician's concerned, you shove their head in or gently persuade them. I think we can do both. But it's been a pleasure today, hasn't it?
Thank you. And, you know, Deirdre's a very good friend of mine, and what she's doing in Northern Ireland is amazing. I stand with Deirdre. I stand with every other parent. We have to do this, and we can do it. Changing hearts and minds isn't easy, but somehow we've got to do it.
Yeah.
Well, non-confrontation isn't easy. It's harder, but the rewards are bigger. So, you're right. This has been great. I want to thank you again.
Thanks so much for coming today, Beth.
We'll probably do it again and again.
Really, really appreciate you being here. It's amazing.
I think we should check in, Ellie, on this law further down the line. So we'll have a mental rule of thumb for next summer. Let's see where we are. And maybe we should talk about that again.
Send my
once
love
you've passed
to
it.